a lot has happened since we spoke last night regarding the Middle East. So let's begin with the most obvious development, Trump's threat to invade the Vatican. Relax, I don't think it's real, but apparently a great many people who vote, drive cars and occasionally reproduce, do believe it. A story's been circulating today that members of the Trump administration warned a Vatican envoy that the US, and I'm quoting here, has the power to do whatever it wants and the church had better take its side. Personally, I wouldn't advise Trump to mess with the Vatican. I mean, the Vatican's got more money than Trump, more followers than Trump, and probably more connections to the mob. I'm joking, obviously. Vice President JD Vance seemed to find the whole thing about as credible as medieval indulgence sales.
I've never seen this reporting. I'd like to actually talk to Cardinal Christophe Pierre and, frankly, to our people to figure out what actually happened. I think it's always a bad idea to offer an opinion on stories that are unconfirmed and uncorroborated, so I'm not going to do that.
Yes, the Pope has criticised US strikes on Iran. That tends to happen when bombs are involved. Popes have historically been a little squeamish about explosions, but the idea that a cardinal was summoned to the White House for a mafia-style shakedown, I mean, give me a break. You'd have to be suffering peak Trump derangement syndrome to believe that. And tragically, that condition is now more widespread than gluten intolerance in inner-city Melbourne. Here's the funny part, though. Let's imagine there's a grain of truth to that story. Not that Trump threatened the church, but imagine the US government did summon a representative to express its displeasure at the church's opposition to US foreign policy. Are the left now saying that's inappropriate? Would they prefer the US to be a theocracy run by the Pope? You know, white smoke rising from the Sistine Chapel every time a drone strike is approved. Speaking of derangement, did you see Green Senator David Shoebridge on Sky News this morning?
My buddy stands with the Iranian people, not some, orange-faced, yellow-haired tyrant in the form of Donald Trump.
And Labor warns the coalition about doing a preference deal with One Nation. The Greens claim they oppose Donald Trump because they're on the side of the Iranian people. Right, so they should have read this report published just hours ago. As the bombs stop, the regime orders executions to accelerate. If Senator Shoebridge stands with the Iranian people, shouldn't he direct his barbs at the leadership of the Islamic Republic, not at the leader of the free world? The Green senator went on to explain his latest objection to Trump, aside from the colour of Trump's hair.
What we have seen in the last 6 weeks is the United States taking the world to the brink of economic chaos and potentially past that brink of economic chaos.
That's a fascinating take on the situation in the Middle East. The terrorist regime running Iran holds the entire world hostage by threatening to blow up oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, but it's the US who have taken the world to the brink of chaos.
We've seen the United States and Israel engage in an illegal war without consulting any of their allies, which has thrown ordinary Australians into deep, deep economic despair. We've seen fuel prices rocket through the entire globe.
He is right that there is economic despair because of rocketing fuel prices. Gee, Senator Shoebridge, imagine if we had access to our own vast natural resources. We'd be almost self-sufficient. But we don't, and we aren't, because your mob won't allow it. It would violate the Greens' doctrine of windmills and wishful thinking. Which brings us to Penny Wong, who this morning on Sky News was asked the dangerous, borderline heretical question: should Australia drill for oil? Watch her almost choke as she madly tries to work out how to maintain her renewables-only ideology without seeming completely divorced from reality, which is no mean feat.
But personally, would you be more open now to drilling for oil and having more refineries on shore?
We want more fuel in Australia and we want more capability in Australia, and that's what we're focused on. We've reformed the EP, the Environment Protection Act, the approvals process, so that it is more streamlined, and if commercial projects stack up, they have a much more streamlined approach under this government.
She could have just said, yes, we need to access our own oil. Instead, she blabbered on about how her government has streamlined the Environmental Protection Act so that energy projects can be approved more quickly. Just on that, Let me quote from the government website where it talks about how the Act has been streamlined. Quote, fossil fuel projects will not be able to access the fast-track assessment pathway. They will continue to access the other approval pathways, which of course typically don't lead to approval. So Penny Wong's position seems to be that we want more fuel in Australia, just not more Australian fuel in Australia. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can dissuade the progressive left that their renewables fantasy is wrong-headed. We could all be walking to work, and they still wouldn't believe that accessing our own fossil fuels might be a good idea. This was interesting. My Sky News colleague, Pete Stefanovic, pointed out that if the US doesn't prevail in the Middle East, we may face a situation where the Iranian regime imposes a toll on oil tankers navigating the Strait of Hormuz.
So oil that we buy would then go to a listed terror group. How comfortable would you be with that going forward?
Now, like the last question, should we access our own fossil fuels and be self-sufficient, the answer to whether or not we'd be happy paying taxes to a listed terror group would seem sort of obvious, wouldn't it? Instead, we got another scenic tour through diplomatic evasion National Park.
Pete, the status of the Strait and free passage through the Strait is central to the negotiations which are underway between Iran and the United States. The position Australia has, as so many other countries have, is that there needs to be freedom of navigation through the Strait. We need to ensure that commercial shipping has the confidence to move through the Strait, and that is the way that we stabilise what is happening on global energy markets.
How hard can it be to simply say we don't pay terrorist regimes? Apparently harder than solving the Middle East conflict. So our Foreign Minister won't come out in support of energy self-sufficiency and won't come out against paying taxes to the IRGC. What a time to be alive. Now, of course, Iran has agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, but only after Donald Trump warned that, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again if Iran failed to comply. Of course, most progressives were more upset by that comment than by the Iranian leadership shouting death to America for the past decade.
The President of the United States just said that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. And no one is reacting. This speaks for itself. What the f*** is anyone even doing at this point?
And Greta was joined by Hollywood actor George Clooney, who wanted Trump charged with a crime for saying Iranian civilization would end. He told journalists in Europe, some say Donald Trump is fine, but if someone says he wants to end civilization, well, that's a crime. Imagine being an actor and taking everything literally. You'd think a performer would appreciate the work of another performer. If George Clooney wants to talk about crimes against humanity, well, let's talk about his role as Bruce Wayne in the 1997 film Batman and Robin. No one with a brain seriously believes Trump was about to vaporise Iran. But progressives did, and thankfully, so too did the Iranian leadership. Senator James Macpherson continues his long run as Australia's most sensible politician.
It's not language that I would use or that I could ever imagine an Australian Prime Minister using. Speaking about it analytically and dispassionately, it's clear that the US President has been threatening to escalate in order to de-escalate, and it may be the reason that there is a ceasefire agreement.
Escalate the rhetoric to de-escalate the situation. I like it. It's almost like Senator James Macpherson is the only person who's been paying attention to Donald Trump these past 5 or 6 years. So because the Iranian leadership feared there might be a nuclear holocaust, we might now have a ceasefire, and we might soon see the Strait of Hormuz open so that we can buy the fuel our own government won't let us drill. With the ceasefire figured out, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer rushed to the Middle East to offer himself for photo opportunities. Listen to him claiming that we have just reached a ceasefire.
What is the purpose of your visit here in the Gulf? What kind of influence do you think you can have?
Well, we've just reached this ceasefire, which is both welcome, and I think there'll be a sense of real relief. There certainly is across the region and for the United Kingdom. But there's work to do.
Typical of NATO members, it's we when the fighting is over. Maybe I'm being too harsh on the British PM. We do have some exclusive vision of him assisting with the ceasefire negotiations. Now, in case George Clooney is watching, I need to point out that wasn't actually the UK Prime Minister. It was just an illustration of Keir Starmer's redundancy. Speaking of redundant, here's our own Prime Minister wanting input into the ceasefire after it's been negotiated.
The Australian government also firmly believes that this has to apply to Lebanon as well.
The Australian government also firmly believes that the entire country can run on sunbeams, but I'm sure Israel appreciated the input. There's something almost endearing about Australia and the UK in moments like this. They're like two spectators arriving at the end of a boxing match and insisting on scoring the rounds. As you'd be aware, the Iranians are now claiming that the ceasefire was supposed to include Israel not attacking their proxy terror group, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. US Vice President JD Vance says that was never part of the deal.
We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states.
Well, obviously, why would the US ever agree that Hezbollah, which continues to threaten Jewish civilians in northern Israel, should be protected? Trump stood the other day alongside the Easter Bunny, not Father Christmas. But our government, like the UK government, contributes nothing to the war against Iran and then demands a say in the result.
We have called early, and we continue to call with others, for the ceasefire to apply to Lebanon, to both Hezbollah and to Israel. If fighting continues in Lebanon, the ceasefire is at risk.
And if Israel aren't permitted to continue fighting in Lebanon, Jews in the north of their country will never be safe from rockets raining down on them. Help me understand how the Australian government can, on the one hand, designate Hezbollah as an Islamist terror organisation, and on the other hand, insist that Hezbollah is protected. For what it's worth, Penny Wong was asked why she wanted the ceasefire to include Israel and Hezbollah, which, let's be honest, means Israel, because Hezbollah have never respected agreements of any kind. Have a listen to the response.
So you believe Lebanon should be part of the deal, which the US and Israel says it shouldn't be. Why have you come to that decision?
For the reason I just outlined, that if fighting continues in Lebanon, the ceasefire is at risk.
Well, with logic like that, it's hard to understand why world leaders aren't beating a path to Canberra for strategic advice. Then Penny Wong was asked the question every Jewish family at risk of Hezbollah terrorist attacks would be asking.
What if Hezbollah were to break that deal?
Well, I've just said both Hezbollah and Israel must observe the ceasefire.
The fact is that Hezbollah has broken numerous agreements and nothing ever happens, apart from calls from people like Penny Wong for Israel to accept new agreements.
If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Oh, to have plain-speaking politicians like that. Speaking of dumb choices, Penny Wong was asked today about our relationship with the United States, our most important ally, and, in the event of war breaking out in our region, the only power that could help us. Her response is the clearest admission I've heard from the Albanese government that we're choosing to let our alliance with the US slide.
How is our relationship at the moment between us and the US?
Well, Pete, the US remains our most important strategic partner. What I would say is, we know President Trump envisages a very different role for America in the world. We also know this is a much more unpredictable United States. I've been upfront with Australians about that. And that is why we continue to work with the US. We also have been working very hard to diversify our relationships.
Translation, we continue to work with the US, but we're working hard to be in a position where we don't need to. Fair enough, I suppose. If we're ever under threat, we can always power the submarines with solar panels and strongly worded statements. Oh, hang on a second. We won't have submarines unless Donald Trump gives them to us. And our government has the hide to claim he's the fool.